Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the First Stars Podcast third season. And my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. It's an amazing episode with Mark Maia, boards the mothership to discuss so-called living, now on Kickstarter. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Maia. Thank you for coming to the First Stars Podcast.
No, thanks for having me.
It's really my pleasure. So I always start off with a question of inspiration to inspire love for comics and who your earliest influences.
Okay. Well, my love for comics basically um started with like when I was a kid, I always liked watching Spider-Man related things and Superman movies and like cartoons, and that's what I got into first. Like I have pictures of me as a toddler holding a Spider-Man toy and wearing a Spider-Man sweater, and so I just liked it right away. And now that I think of it, actually, I don't know if that toy came with it or if my mom gave it to me, but it was like a thin wire that you could have him swing on, and that's a choking. There's no way it would. It's the equivalent of like something like in a murder movie, we get and
Yeah.
go behind. That's what it was. Now that I think about it, I was like, that's not safe. I would never give that to my toddler. He would just like instantly like no way. I'm just thinking about that now. Anyways, I'm off track.
Oh,
So yeah, the I've always loved that, but I never actually got into actual comic books until I was like 13. So when I was 13, a comic book store opened up nearby. I walked in. I was like, "Hey, so comics, eh? I know nothing. Where should I start?" And they're like, "Well, this is new," and it was Spider-Man #1, Torment, with illustrated by Todd McFarlane. And I was like, "Yeah, I like Spider-Man." And I got into that and I loved it. And I was like, oh, I'll keep buying it back. And that was the only time ever there was a comic book store there. So it was like just meant to be. It was like just put there by like a sign of God. It's like, oh, this thing showed up. And I went, and then it shut down, and it was never ever a comic book store in that area again.
oh no.
So I grew up. But
What did you
but
do
I
to
started.
it?
Okay, I do. They were. I think it's a bad location for a comic book store. Like the entire location is a bunch of older immigrant families, like mine. My family's was an immigrant family,
Yeah.
so there's just a bunch of immigrant families, not a lot of kids. And I got to tell you, from uh, being from an immigrant family, they never were like, "Let's get comic books for you." They were like, what the hell's a comic book? Here's a soccer ball. Go outside, play in the street. Like that's how my parents were.
Yeah.
So yeah, Spider-Man Torment got me into it, and then I started going to the flea market and looking through these like quarter bins for
Mm,
like old stories. And then I discovered Wizard Magazine, and I was
mm.
like, oh, what's this? And then Wizard Magazine, if you look at the prices, and every time there was an event, there was like a sentence that was like, the clone saga or whatever, like something would happen, right? And I was like, oh, what's that? And I go to comic book store. I was like, what's this story? And they said, oh, that's a Spider-Man story. It's here, it's there. And I was like, okay, so I go find it all. I was like, well, I want to read this, because I couldn't just go to Wiki, right?
Right,
And
right.
being like, so I'd have to memorize this as a child, being like, I got to remember on, because I used to get my comic books on Saturday because that's when the flea market was open. So I'd go there and get my comic books on Saturday. And I didn't know Comic Book Wednesday was a thing. So I'd go there, get my comic books, and I'd ask him for all these little treasure hunts. And it's funny because I remembered them all. As a kid, it's crazy how you remember everything. Like my
Yeah.
toddler's 3, and he only has like 6 Pokemon in the house, but he remembers the name of all of them, and I'm struggling with them.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how like your brain is so empty. You're just a sponge for information, and what you choose to fill it with as a child is, as an adult, you look back and was like, what a waste of space. I just like I had every issue. Remember, I was also a big card collector, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I had I had the price of like every major card and value of every comic kind of
Yeah.
like ingrained in my head, and it was just a waste of space. But I was a good source of information.
Oh, I agree. I remember when I was a kid, my thing was baseball cards and comic books. And
Yep.
baseball cards, amount of statistics I had memorized in my head of back of baseball cards, and the amount of comic books and their numbers and their major characters and blah blah blah. Yeah, nowadays I'm just I'm at the point where I look at my phone and I write a piece of information, I go do the thing, and then like I gotta go back to my phone to check it again. I gotta go back to things like when I was a kid, I would just be like looked at once, like got it,
Yep.
got the
And
information, walk away.
and the thing is too, like, because I was such a fountain of information, when I started going to the comic book store, sorry, the comic book store was like based in the flea market, and so they had a booth in there. And I'd go there, and so I was a regular there. I was there every Saturday, and I'd be there when it opened. I'd stay there till it closed. Eventually, I was helping behind the counter, and people would come selling like stacks of books. And he's like, "Okay, give me the books." And he looks at the stack. He's like, he looked at me. He's like, "Anything good here?" And I'm like, a 13-year-old kid. He's like an adult. Anything good in here? And he's like, and I'd be like, "That one's 40 in the guide. That one's 20 in the guide. These three are 10. Nothing else. Everything else is about $5, $2." And he's like, all right. So he looks at the guy. He's like, "I'll give you $40 for the entire stack," you know? And the guy's like, "All right." So gives the guy $40, takes the stack, takes out like the two books he wants or the few books he wants out of there.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Hey, you want to buy this stack for $40?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So it costs him nothing, but I'm still getting a good deal because it was like a giant stack. Like $40 was still a good deal.
Yeah.
And he's like, basically, he thought, "Oh, I can't sell these books as well. So here, do you want this?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll take it." So he'd either sell it to me at a discount for the same price. So basically, he got these books that he could put on his wall to sell for free.
Yeah.
So that was my little superpower. And as far as like who would like my comic book influences was in the beginning was Stan Lee because I didn't know anybody else. His voice was on the cartoons, right? His name was on the comic books. Like it was the one thing that stood out. He was like the rock star of comic books. So that's who I knew. So I grew up like loving Stan Lee, and eventually I got to meet him when I was older, and I was like, that was pretty cool. And but now like that I'm an adult reading comic books. I'm a big fan of like Robert Kirkman or Brian Michael Bendis, Mark Miller, uh, uh, Hill. What's Hill's first name? Stephen King's son, Joe Hill.
Oh yeah, 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 Joe
Joe
Hill.
Hill. So like there's a few of those, and and keep forgetting his name, Vaughn, something Vaughn,
Oh, Brian K. Vaughan. Oh, yeah, he
Brian
did
K. Vaughn. Yeah. Brian K. Vaughn.
Saga and shit.
Why the Last Man? I think he does Ex Machina too, doesn't he? That was another one. But Why the Last Man is a big one he did that I really enjoyed. So yeah, those are like my like top writers. I like love those guys. Those guys are awesome.
But for me, it was Neil Gaiman. Unfortunately, it's not okay to
Mhm.
say apparently say anymore because of what's going on with him. But either way, my favorite writer was Neil Gaiman.
Is there something going on with Neil? I just watched the masterclass from Neil
Yeah,
Gaiman. I
yeah, Neil
listened to the whole
Gaiman.
like
Neil Gaiman has become a problem now,
is
unfortunately.
he's like racist now?
No, no, a potential sexual assault.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that's going around. Cosby's got a case of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I will point out on my show that it's alleged sexual
Mm,
assault, so I don't get sued by anybody. But apparently, that's why he's off social media now. It's because he's hiding.
mm, I
But
see.
he still is my favorite. Sandman is still the pinnacle of comic writing, in my opinion.
Oh. I've read more of his novels than I have his comics, actually.
I would recommend Sandman. It literally is a work of art. It is
Yeah, I
probably the greatest series. I mean, and I've read a lot. Greatest series probably I've ever read.
all right, I'll give it a go. I've actually never read Sandman because as a kid, that art was a little too it looked a little too adult, too intense. It wasn't something that appealed to children,
Yeah.
right? So I see it as like a 13-year-old. I was like, it's like bright red spandex Spider-Man or like Death with the crazy spiky hair and like so I was like, the style doesn't really do it for me. As an adult now, I can look at it and being like, that's cool. But back in the day, it was like, Jim Lee, like just colorful, like
Well,
that's what I wanted.
I'll say I'm currently a teacher, and I will say that Sandman comes as close to being true classic literature than anything I've ever read in my entire life. I mean, I if it wasn't as adult and inappropriate for school, I would teach it in a classroom. That's how I think elevated of a artwork that is. But
All right.
unfortunately, you can't show, nudity, swearing, all that shit. You can't have that in the classroom. Like,
Yeah.
hey, parents, don't trust me, this is good. Don't
Yeah.
worry
Well,
about it.
like I said, I like Neil Gaiman because I've read his novels, and he's not my favorite novelist, but I like him.
Yeah,
I prefer Stephen King over him. Mind you, I don't care for comic books that are based on Stephen King's stuff. I
yeah.
find them rather dull. The comic book for The Stand, loved the art, loved the art. Thought it was a little dull, um, but I bought them all anyways because I was like, oh, maybe I'll read them one day. I was like, now I'm a little older. Maybe I was like, maybe I'll give him a chance, and I'll like him a little more now. But
Hmm. Well, to move on to promoting you, you're so far the writer creator of So-Called Living, which books 3 and 4, because you already made books 1 and 2. So what part sparked the creation of the series, and which part of the idea of it intrigued you the most?
Well, what sparked the idea of the series was I actually the thing I wanted to do was I always wanted to write, and but when I to get into comic books, I thought I was going to illustrate into comic books because I am an artist, and but I'm not a sequential artist. That's not my strong suit. So, like, I designed the entire Kickstarter page. I did the one of our elite covers this time around, the one with all the bunnies on it. Um, but so I wanted to get into writing, and when I sat down, I was like, I think I want to do something where I want to do a world where like monsters exist among us and they act normal like us to an extent. Obviously they still have their monster rules, but I wanted it to be like a the barista could be a vampire, the person on the bus could be a werewolf beside you, but it's not like True Blood where everybody's laying in secret. Like it's
Yeah.
everybody's in the open, you're okay with each other, and there are some psycho killers among them, but there's psycho killers among us in the real world. So it's not a stretch to be like some vampires still kill people, other ones don't because there's facilities for them, right? So there's ways for them to get their blood. They don't have to kill people. Werewolves don't have to kill people and turn people, but they some of them are bad and they do. But that's just like us. We're not supposed to kill people either, but some of us do.
Hmm.
So, anyways, I set up the rules for this world, and I want it to be any of these monsters to be possible. Now, there's no superheroes, there's no Superman or anything like that in this world, and it's a dark comedy. And I didn't actually know it was a dark comedy until I sat down and I wrote out all the characters first. I was like, here's a bio for Jack, here's a bio for Jill, Nick, and Casper, and I was like, here's what they look like, here's what inspires me, here's their attitude, their personalities, and so I wrote a whole bio for all these characters. And I was like, all right, now that I understand these characters inside and out, I I basically set them on a path. I was like, okay, Jack to I want Jack and Jill to kind of be starting off in a bit of an argument in the beginning. And then I want them to meet these vampires. And these vampires are not good guys. They're cool guys, but they're not good guys. and so and then and Jack gets turned into a vampire. It's not really a spoiler. It's the basis of all my promotions. Jack's gets turned into a vampire, but um, so what I do is I have these beats that I want them to hit, but I basically throw the characters in the world and I kind of envision it playing out like a TV show in my head, and I just write down what they're saying based on the character. So for me, it's almost like a disembodied experience. I It's like these characters came from me, but they're their own entity. So it's like this is how Jack would talk. And if Jack says something stupid because he's a bit of a moron, what is his girlfriend? That's she's she's a bit nasty. So she's a bit of a hard ass, and she's not the friendliest person. So and he's a bit of a moron. So them together, you're like, why are they dating? But obviously they're going to irritate each other, or he's going to irritate her. So that's how it starts off. He's asking questions, he's irritated. So I was like, how does somebody like her act to his questions? And then they do this, and how do they react? And so I just watch these things happen. It's like a sandbox, and I write it down. So a lot of times I don't exactly know what's going to happen when on their trip from A to B. So I don't know what the gap is until it happens, and then some lines come out naturally, and there's some some natural, snappy, funny dialogue that comes out of that. And as I started writing it, it started becoming more sarcastic kind of comedy, and but it was a dark comedy, so there's some like mild decapitation, and so the story kind of took on a breath of its own. I feel like it became a dark comedy because of the characters who are in it. You got a bunch of goofballs in a serious situation. So I've described it before as like imagine the cast of Friends, but they're being hunted down by the Sopranos. Because at some point in the beginning of the story, Jack is like, I got turned to a vampire and I got to deal with all these vampire rules. And so they're all minor things that he's just adjusting to. Like, I can't get into my apartment because there's nobody to invite me in. I can't go out in the sun or I catch on fire. So there's all these things he's just adapting to. And they're kind of goofy type of things. The first two books were that set up Jack, his situation, and his friends. Um, and then in books 3 and 4, the series we start laying down the groundwork for a much more serious story. We learn more about the motives of the mob guys that are after them, and again, this whole process was the same way. I just tossed these soprano like characters and being like, okay, these guys aren't funny, and in my mind it's like they really want Jack, and they're not fucking around. So, and they're not, like, the main boss isn't happy that they still haven't been able to catch this guy, and he's very upset. And there's like 3 panels on the Kickstarter, or 3 pages on the Kickstarter page, and they're having that conversation like, why am I driving, why am I the boss driving around up and down the streets looking for this vampire, basically, is what he's trying to get at. So, and all that just kind of happened, and I didn't know it was happening. Like, I know where the story's going, so it's not a lot random. I'm not just writing random. Like, I have main beats they're going to hit. I know that they got to turn a left up ahead, but I don't know what's going to happen on the whole road there, right? Every stop sign, every green light that they come across, I don't know what that is, but I know they got to make a left when they're seeing the street.
Yeah.
So, and that's my process.
So when you're building this world, right? And you said you had werewolves, zombies, vampires, and I remember the scenes in book three where there's a zombie who definitely seems very zombie. I mean, he's not like adapted to our civilized world. So do some of the characters like zombies still act zombie-ish? And is there then a stratification of who how these monsters can live in society where zombies would apparently probably not be overly functional in high society?
Yeah, so zombies are a good example because zombies, they are zombies. They're like the shambling, slow, like brains. And we kind of establish that in the beginning. In the very first page for issue 1, there's a zombie outbreak on the news. And Jack and Jill don't care. It's like every day, it's like, it's raining outside. There's a zombie outbreak happened. And there's like teams that come and they wrangle up the zombies and they clean up the situation before it gets too bad. But yeah, most of the zombies are like shambling zombies. There's one that shows up in book 2, and the reason he acts a little different is because he's like freshly made, right? And it's kind of a joke on, like, at the beginning when Jack enters the coffee house, he's a brand new vampire, and there's a character that sits there and he's like, vampire? And it's like it was obvious that he was a vampire, and that's the guy's little comment. So at the end of the book, this zombie walks in and he's like, zombie? And it's like, so it's like he's fresh, but eventually this guy will be a shambling person. And but zombies in this world, yeah, they don't function with our society. They're more like, imagine the crackheads on the street. You're just those guys living in the doorways, and like it's sad in our reality, but it's not really. If you think about it, zombies are kind of a sad deal too. It's like these people that got bitten.
Yeah.
So it's a dark comedy. So we make light of this, right? But so they're like the street people, right? They're like there's not like crackheads in the streets, it's zombies in the streets, which
Yeah.
makes sense because if there were people living on the streets, they'd be the easiest targets for zombies.
Yeah.
So so people would get used to them. So there's like the bad areas that like drive through, and there's just zombies everywhere. But you get used to it. You're just like, oh yeah, you just knock over a zombie. You got to just deal with it. And there's like one line in book 3 where it's like the guys are driving through like a zombie filled street, and I think Tim makes the comments like, you got where Jack says, I think, to stop or pull over or whatever. And Tim makes the line is like, you got a lot to learn about living in the ghetto. Rule number 1, you never get out of the car or whatever like that. So that's the environment. So they don't have homes and have jobs. They're more like these things you have to just deal with and not get bitten, step over them so they don't bite you. But you can, it's kind of, what was what was the first zombie movie in the mall? Was it Dawn of the Dead? Day of the Dead? Dawn?
Yeah, Dawn did. Oh, there's two versions. There's
Dawn.
the Snyder version and the original Romero version.
Yeah. So the older one in the mall of Dawn of the Dead, where you see the guys and they're just running through the zombies. They have the guns and they're just like, hey, it's no big deal. Because really, it's not a big deal to avoid those guys, right? It's when they became fast that they became a problem.
Yeah,
So, um, and that's these guys are the slow guys. So, like, if you know how to deal with them, like, nobody's really frightened of them, but you don't want to get bitten because that's still, they still follow the same rules. You get bitten, you turn into a zombie. So,
true of any people outside, right? You don't get bit by anybody walking
yeah,
around the streets.
No, no. Yes, that's a general rule of thumb. Do not get bitten. Do not let anybody bite you.
Right.
So I know the streets of London, Ontario right now are since COVID are not the best. Are not the best. They're getting better. Downtown turned into like remember Detroit in the RoboCop movies?
Yeah.
That was downtown London, Ontario. It was like everything was boarded up. There was like crackheads taking a shit in doorways. It was like just a disaster here. And it was not safe and it was just brutal. So that was that was it. And I saw these things. Like you'd walk down, and you're like, okay, he's doing crack, they're asleep, he's taking his shit. Oh, that person's patting down their own shit. And it's like they just what like that's just it's like a fucking freak show in every doorway because everybody's so just high.
Yeah.
And the way our government is, we're supporting it. So, anyways, that's a different
So,
topic.
so what is your thing it was gonna and this is in book three. There's a suggestion made with the vampires and werewolves, and one of the characters suggests that burning from the sun is the wrath of God. Yeah, on vampires. Now, here's my question. Understanding the rules of vampires and werewolves, there's a idea is that they're somehow evil. There's which lends itself to heaven, hell, all that kind of stuff. How
Mhm.
does though their existence impact like how the world thinks about these things?
Well, the way the world treats like vampires from werewolves. Imagine, well, let's not get too far here. Like let's look at our world here right now, where any division we have is uh, basically race related, right? Like any negative divisions we have white, black, Chinese, Indian, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's lots of races, and different people have different reasons for being racist toward one person or another. So in this world, the colors don't matter. Where people are racist, or some people don't like vampires because they don't trust them, or they don't like because there's a stigma to vampires. There's a certain like I can't trust these because they're these type of people, or I can't trust werewolves because they're these type of people. So and or I can't trust zombies because obvious reasons. But that's how this world treats them. So it's more of they're not looked at as monsters as much as they are like possible races that are not accepted everywhere. So in some ways, although the world's acceptance of monsters in many cases, it's kind of how earlier think of it's like earlier racism. So you might go to a
Bro,
restaurant. What? Sorry.
this is like a Jim Crow allegory.
Yeah, but not that bad. So
Okay.
think like shortly thereafter, where like things are good but not terrible. Sorry, things are better but not great. That's what I meant to say. So think kind of that situation, but that's only like certain pockets of people and things like that. And again, that nobody really takes it too far, or also he takes it too seriously, again because it's a dark comedy, nothing's taken all that serious. There's a scene in book two where everybody's like holding their cross out at Jack, and this is a world where, yeah, if you know vampires exist and you're racist against vampires, or you're concerned about them because they're those type of people, then you'll have a cross with you just in case, right? So that's the kind of mentality of this world. So it's not so much like vampires are inherently evil. It's just you might some people are more accepting of different races than others, and the it comes up in at the end of book one where this is like racist conversation where they're with a vampire saying, well, racism is an issue. And because Jack is like, my landlord is not the issue because he can't get invited into his own apartment, and that's when they break into racism is an issue, and they do some callbacks to that in issue two, where I don't want to give anything away, but basically a woman tells him Jack something he doesn't want to hear, and he's like racist. All right. So, but she wasn't being racist. He was just being very defensive.
Now,
And so,
not
go ahead.
only is there werewolves, vampires, and zombies, but they also reference to mermaids as well. So are all supernatural creatures then wandering about?
Yeah, everything is possible in this. So I haven't introduced everything. Like I say werewolves, but you haven't actually seen any werewolves. Well, you have, but you haven't seen them werewolf out yet. So you might not actually be sure who the werewolves are. But they are coming, and they will werewolf out. So
So are we talking like Frankenstein's monsters hanging around? Are we talking the swamp creature from like Blue Lagoon kind of stuff? Talking
yeah,
crypt,
they are all these creatures are things I have like in my back pocket, but right now they're not written. So right now, anybody involved in the story is limited to vampires, werewolves, zombies, and mention of uh mermaids, and forest fairies are also also mentioned. And but again, some characters are just mentioned but not taken too seriously. There's also which is not as supernatural, but there is one character that I've is going to be um, a ninja. They're going to be a ninja in future books, and I've already planted them in the story somewhere, and so I'm going to bring them back as a ninja. so,
very cool, very
for,
cool.
so that's for some random. Oh, there are also ghosts and poltergeists and all
Yeah.
that. That's still all that stuff is going to be in the comic as well.
So a great interaction from book three is Tim and Jack. They're a lot of fun. So how much fun it was to write these characters? And right now, there's a center around the character called Mr. DeLuca.
Mhm.
And the third issue kind of implies that there's going to be a connection between what happens in the world of Tim and Jack and what happens with Mr. DeLuca. Um, are Tim and Jack the best ones to be part of this whole interaction with DeLuca? DeLuca seems like he's pretty serious, and Jack and Tim do not seem very serious.
Let's say that if it was Jack and Tim left to their own devices against Mr. DeLuca, they would not do well. But as you'll see as the story evolves, um, they won't be left to themselves to deal with this, and that is one thing that's becomes a frustration point, which is starting already. If you read issue 3, that scene in the limo, he's already getting frustrated that he's like, why can't I get these two idiots? like how hard could this be?
Yeah,
Right? Because he's like, I just want this one vampire, but somehow it just keeps slipping through the cracks. Right? So they lay out some traps, and that trap takes off or kicks off in issue 4, but that also kicks off a the most actiony scene that you've seen. Basically everything's been very chatty and funny. Like it's been pretty upbeat. There's a lot of I like to try to keep the writing and the chatter between the people snappy and funny and entertaining. So I don't want people to be like, oh my God, stop talking. So but in book 4, the action just like takes off. And it's not just like, well, it is, there's a lot more physical in it, and it gets very serious. So there are some like very serious tones. So you kind of start seeing more of how the mob, Mr. DeLuca and his gang, how they see reality, where they see reality very serious. It's very dark to them. And so their world of violence is a lot darker, where for Jack and Tim, their world is like uh, Seinfeld French jokes, right? As in they're just annoyed by things. They're people on the internet that are just complain about things and be like, oh my God, that's them, right? They like because they've never had anything serious happen in their life until now.
yeah.
And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, you got the mob guys who they're very serious, they're very violent, they don't like to take shit. And you'll see that where when they get into a brawl or something violent, it's violent. It's serious stuff. And like think of any mob movies you've seen, like they take their shit seriously. But then you get in the middle, you have Nick and Casper, and they aren't as serious as the mob, but they're not goofballs like Tim and Jack. They're kind of like, think of the Sons of Anarchy. They're like, we know we're the cool guys here. Nobody's gonna mess with us. We're the Sons of Anarchy. So Nick and Casper is like, we're the baddest vampires in town. Nobody's gonna mess with us. So they know they're the coolest guys in town, and to them, they're like, everybody wants to be like us. Come on, you gotta love us, and they they don't take shit, but for them they'll get into a brawl and they'll be like, yeah, that was a good brawl. You know, kind of like very Sons of Anarchy. Like they'll be like, that was a good one. Like that, they're serious at the moment, but at the end, they're like, that was good. Where for the mob, it's all serious all the time. So if I was to classify those guys, I would say Tim and Jack and Marvin, who's the third friend, they're the cast of Friends. Um, the mob guys, they're the cast of Sopranos. And Nick and Casper, Nick is kind of like Butcher. but together, like Butcher from the Boys, but together they're like Sons of Anarchy. So or Sons of Anarchy, they fool around because they're like the boys, they chuckle around, but they deal with serious shit. But at the same time, you see them together and they're all buddy, 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 buddy. But in Sopranos, you don't really get that buddy, buddy. There's always that tension of like everybody here is dangerous, and that's kind of how it is with Mr. DeLuca and his gang.
So
So
for Mr. DeLuca, what is his big vision for what he's looking for? Like, what's his goal?
Mr. DeLuca, like this thing is, it's not his like he's been the boss for a while, right? So his goal is money, right? Money, power. There's it's just like typical mob stuff that you'd see in the movies. Like he's not out there to be world famous or conquer the world. He's a mobster. They just wants money. That's money and power. He wants to be respected. That's his thing. So this Jack thing for him is kind of something that's being like blown out of proportion for him. It should be something that was dealt easily for him, but then it's not being dealt easily. So he decides to get involved himself because he's like, it's no big deal. But now gets annoyed by it. So it's this thing that escalates. So for him, it starts off as a small thing. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna go pick up this vampire for my own dirty deeds, and then he can't get a hold of him, so he gets irritated. So he puts his boys on the job, and they can't get a hold of him, and then it just escalates and escalates and escalates. So now he starts, and that you kind of see that in the 3 panels that I have on the Kickstarter page. He's getting so irritated by this thing that should be so easy to handle, and that's his things. That so he's not like your typical bad guy where he's like, I want to conquer the world. He's like, I just want money and I'm going to get money. I'm going to make money off this guy. But for some reason, I can't get my hands on him. And I'm so freaking irritated because he's got a short fuse and he's selfish. He's all about his big head, right? He's got big ambitions. So he doesn't like
Well,
people fucking with that.
go back to vampire rules. One of the rules of vampires is that the vampire that is created is so not is basically owned by the creator, one who made him. Is that true in this world as well?
So that was one of the things where sorry, just getting over cold. That was one of the things where I didn't want Jack to be totally like obedient to Nick. But Nick's character, the way I wrote that is he doesn't want that. Like he wants people to respect him for him and who he is. So that never comes up. So I've never implemented that sired thing, but I do have there's a bit of that loyalty. Like Casper, he also made Casper, which hasn't been revealed yet, but it's not a huge plot twist or anything. But he made Casper, and oh no, he does. I think in part one he does say he makes Casper. He doesn't say it directly. He says something about like "Oy vey, this kid is stupid" or something, and Casper says a line like, "Oh, you thought I was dumb." And he's like, "Oh, you are, but it's just who's dumber or who's stupider or whatever he says, right?" So that's kind of the hint is like he made them both, but and he's got the loyalty of Casper, and at to some extent, Jack is happy to see him, so they get along. So it's like you automatically get along, you be buddies, but I don't pull the siring cord as much. So it's like ultimate loyalty. It's like, oh, you made me, and I'm not upset with you, even though you killed me, you made me a vampire. I'm not upset with you, but I haven't really played with that. So that is one of those rules that I, other than them being some sort of bond between them, I didn't want it to be that controlling. So I wanted people to have more free will. So the siring rule of a vampire is something that I don't really play with. I don't lock them into that as much. So
So the other great thing of once again we're talking about something's on Kickstarter. You already had the first 2 books, very successful Kickstarter. Your current Kickstarter already we blew past you blew past the goal. So for those of us in the world, what's the key to a successful Kickstarter, and which rewards do you have for backers that you think are this time going to be the most exciting for them?
well, as how to be a successful Kickstarter, I don't know. I'm because like yeah, I funded, but I had a goal of like $2,000, which for an indie comic that's for an unknown is pretty good. So what I tried to do, because I am an unknown, right, and that's the scary part about getting in indie comics. I'm an unknown and I'm working with characters that are unknowns for a story in a world that's unknown. So it's like nobody knows me. And thing with indie comic books is there's a lot of great indie comic books out there, but there's a lot of not great indie comic books out there. And because it's like when you go to DC or Marvel, right? You can see a Spider-Man book. You're like, okay, I know what to expect out of a Spider-Man book. So it's a safe money interaction, right?
Right.
Or if I see Mark Miller's name on a book, I'll just buy it because I like Mark Miller. So that's for me, that's a safe gamble. I might not like all the Spider-Man stuff, I might not like all the Mark Miller stuff, but for me, that's a safe gamble to when we're talking about exchange of my money for entertainment. But when it comes to indie, it's a shot in the dark. You're like, I'm gonna give you my money. I hope your book is good. So the best I could do is try to nail it with a really flushed out, professional looking Kickstarter page. Right. So I try to get that out. I designed the logo myself. And I wanted the logo to look a specific way. I wanted it to look professional. I wanted the art to be a specific way to match um, my writing style. So I had the script written for over 12 years, but I didn't actually pull the trigger until I found the right artist. And that was Marco. Marco's art style matches my story, and he's getting better and better. All the issues get better, and four is his best one as far as art goes. Um, and it's so that what I was trying to do is I was competing with, even though I was looking at the other indies to see what they were doing, visually I was trying to compete with Marvel and DC and Image and Dark Horse. I was like, what do their logos look like? What do I like about their logos? What kind of paper do they use? Like right down to the paper. Is somebody asked me the question the other day. So I was like, oh, you went for like top quality paper. And I was like, well, no, I didn't actually. I did the opposite. And if you pick up my so-called living, if you pick an actual physical copy of so-called living, because I have books 1 and 2 are available, but they feel just like picking up a Marvel book, picking up a Spider-Man book, picking up a Batman book. Like they feel the same, other than the exceptions of like, there's the special die cut cover and glossy hard covers. But the floppy feel that you pick up and you're like, oh, I'm familiar with this. This is a basic comic book. I wanted So-Called Living to feel like a basic comic book. I didn't want it to feel like a premium edition. I wanted to stand side by side with the big two, and I wanted to blend in with them. I want it to be like, oh, we're just like them. And they choose thinner grade paper because they're producing so much and they got to keep their costs down so they can maximize their profits. That's what they did. I didn't do it for profit. I did it to match them. If they had super glossy pages and thick stock, then that's what I would have done. I would have done whatever they did. So, ironically, to be more professional, I downgraded all my paper instead of upgrading all my paper, because that's one thing I noticed about some indie comic books is they're either like an awkward size, or they're a hardcover, or they have some special glossy paper because they were like, oh, I went for the super glossy silk thick stock, and I was like, yeah, it's a nice book, but as soon as you pick it up, it stands out as not a regular comic, right? It
Mm.
stands out as like a premium one, which is not regular. So that's one thing I tried to do, was trying to make it fit in there. And I understand that art is what's going to lure people in, and my story is what's going to keep people in. So I try to keep my story good, but I understand that Marco's art is what's going to hook them eventually. But if my writing is shit, then I'm not going to keep them. So I've been lucky enough that I've had people, because I've been at a few shows, not many, some smaller shows, and I've had people that have picked up the Kickstarter and they showed, they're like, I backed Kickstarter, I loved it, or they'll buy, so somebody will buy 2 books, and then they'll tell their friend, and their friend shows up, instead of just reading their copy, they come over and they buy 2 books, they buy books 1 and 2. Now I'm curious to see what happens when I have 3 and 4 printed, if people will buy issues 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because right now there's only 2. So it's easy for somebody to come up and be like, oh, buy issues 1 and 2, issues 1 and 2. I rarely sell just 1 book. Usually people buy 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. And which is great. So, but when there's 4 books, I think I'm going to get a lot more single purchases, because that's more of a commitment, right? To get 4 books at once. So that's going to be interesting. So, anyways, as far as being successful, Yeah, I'm successful for an unknown entity. I think I'm doing all right. My buddy Derek Loffman, who is he's been he just 96,000 Canadian is what he just made on his Kickstarter that just closed like yesterday or 2 days ago. So he's built a fan base for the last 10 or 15 years. So on Instagram, so he's got a big following. So when he started doing comics, everybody jumped on. He started with art books, and now he's doing more comic-y related things, and everybody jumps on. So it does really well for him. So, and he's worked for Marvel, and he's done like he's worked for Marvel as in he's designed their toys or he's designed this, and so because of how he got there, he can't really help me because I was like, so how did you get all these sales? He's like, well, I have a like across all my socials, I have like 500,000 plus followers. I was like, okay, well, I can't do that in my short time frame. Not to mention, I'm a writer, not an artist, so I can't have a Kickstarter page where I'm like, "Hey, look at what I drew today." Like I'm an artist, but I'm not going to just I'm not going to just put up random drawings that have nothing to do with my book because I'm not a sequential artist, and I'm too slow an artist. So I'd be able to put up a thing every 2 months. So that's I'm not going to build a following that way. So yeah, that's my the only advice I can give is learn as much as you can. Try to mimic as much successful what successful comics do as much as possible. That's why I have the sex pod editions, because a lot of the a lot of successful covers or successful books on Kickstarter. If you look at the top tier of like highest grossing books, if they're not an IP or from a well known artist, they're usually from softcore porn comics is basically what it translates to. They'll have strippers on the covers. They do all this. Now, my so-called living, heads up to anybody who's going to back it. There's nothing sexy in the book. There's nothing sexy. It's a great read, but there's nothing sexy about it. So I thought to play along with that, that I would do these sexy covers that play on things that happen in the book. Like in the two covers for books 3 and 4 is the zombie girl coming out of a pool full of zombies. And that plays with one of the jokes in book 3, where Jack is like, oh, there's always a pool. This is him talking to Tim, where Tim's like, oh, my apartment has a pool. And Jack's like, oh, there's always a pool. And they cut to the pool, and the pool's full of zombies. Because there's one underlining story that I don't outright explain, but I want people to pick up that in this world, zombies are attracted to pools like leaves are attracted to pools. So when you open your pool and you have to clean it, you're not scraping leaves out, you're scraping like zombies out. You're like, oh, I got to get these guys out of here. So I have the sexy girl coming out of a pool full of zombies. That ties in with the story. And the second cover is all these girls like tearing each other's clothes off. There's no nudity, mind you. So you see like bra and lingerie. So there's never any nudity. And they're ripping off each other's clothes, and there's just a bunch of them just punching each other in the face and ripping each other's hair. It's just this big scrap, like a big bar brawl. And the reason I did that one is because if you look at the standard cover for book 4, it's a big bar brawl, but it's all guys. So there's one girl in the middle. She's the character that gets introduced in that book. But there's this giant bar brawl, and it's just guys on top of each other and just punching each other in the face and grabbing each other by the hair and the head. So I was like, well, that's the brawl that happens in book 4. But what if all the girls at that location got into a brawl of their own? So I'll use that for a sexy cover. So, and then I put what clinches it, what ties it into the whole universe is the badge I put on it that says obligatory sex pot edition. And that plays in with the humor of the book, being like, if you want to be successful on Kickstarter, you got to have a sexy cover. So
Yeah.
that's why I put that on there. And that plays with the tongue-in-cheek humor of the way the guys don't take anything seriously, but they're open about it. Like, I understand people like sexy things. That's why I give them a sexy cover if you want to buy it. But if you don't buy a sexy cover, that's fine. I like sexy things. So but I put it there because sex sells. I'm trying to be as open as possible. I'm not trying to be sneaky. That's why the badge is on there. Because one thing I don't like to do is I don't like to deceive people.
Yeah.
Right. I don't like to do it. And even though I get involved sometimes in things that people might find like they're offended, because people get offended by things easily. I'm an older guy. Like I'm gonna be 50 in 2 years. So um and I didn't grow up with the internet. I didn't grow up with everybody getting offended by everything. So but I, every once in a while I'll step into something and I'm like, wow, I'm not going to say sorry. I was like, I did it honestly. I didn't do it to be a dick. But if you're offended by it and it's like a large thing, I was like, I'm just not going to do it. Like I just won't do it again unless I have to, right? Like if people get offended by like somebody gets offended by me saying forest fairy, well, I'm going to keep saying that because it's not a derogatory toward, it's not aimed toward gay people. It's in a world where forest fairies exist and they're weak little flappy creatures. And it's one vampire that's like a Sons of Anarchy style, like tough guy describing like a Twilight, Bram Stoker's Dracula vampire, and he looks at them and he compares them to forest fairies because he thinks they're all so emotional and they're all into. It's just the Twilight vampires, so he doesn't like them because that's not him. But it's funny because like to think that I'm homophobic because a character in my book said something is ridiculous. If I wrote a book about a killer and I was like, I want to taste your blood, does it mean I want to taste somebody's blood? No, there's the killer character. Like I can make that character as angry as homophobic as I want. It doesn't make me homophobic. Keep in mind that character is not homophobic. There's no homophobic characters in that book, but it doesn't even come up. But but they shouldn't judge a writer by the characters he makes. That's ridiculous. Like, as the essence of a good writer is being able to separate yourself from your characters as well and just kind of let them grow on their own and don't let them be limited by your own rules. So,
Hmm.
and that's how I let my characters grow. So, if anybody is racist in the book, if anybody's a murderer, or anybody, it's not me. I'm not racist. I'm not a murderer. I'm not homophobic. So, none of those things. It's I think it's ridiculous for somebody to make an assumption of the writer because of what they say. It's different if the book is like trying to like sell a message, kind of like a campaign against a certain type of person. Then okay, that's a little different. Then that person might have an issue.
Hmm.
So, but that's not the messaging of the book. That's not a goal of the book. So, anyways,
So for the listeners who are definitely going to back your book, between which dates is the campaign active for?
so the campaign is active all of October. So I thought this was perfect because it's a dark comedy. It deals with monsters and it's the Halloween month. So if you wanna get into Halloween with a nice like dark horror, it's not a scary book. It's not that kind of horror book, right? It's not like Harrow County. It's not like guts and gore and zombies feeding on. That's not the kind of book it is. I'll give you that heads up. If you want to see what kind of book it is, issue one is free on Global Comics. Just go check it out. You can just read it for yourself. But yeah, so it runs October, all of October. It's on Kickstarter for all of October. That was the perfect Halloween book. So if you want it, I highly recommend you get it because I got to tell you, I am terrible at getting these physical copies sold after Kickstarter. Not like you bought everybody who got on Kickstarter, I ship fast. So I'm great with that. But as far as making it available after Kickstarter, like having it on Amazon or having it at comic book stores, I am terrible. I'm so busy. So to get it out at a con is if you see me at a con, I'll have them. But other than that, like your best bet is to get them on Kickstarter. If you wait to I was like, I'm gonna wait till he sends them and sells them online. I was like, yeah, you're gonna be waiting for a long time. It's not because I don't want to, it's just my life is so incredibly busy.
Hmm.
So
Oh, Mr. Maya, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Thank you so much.
no, thanks for having me. It was great talking to
Have a great night, sir.
you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Virgin Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Turn for the next episode when Cy Spurrier returns to the mothership to discuss The Flash and Hellblazer Dead in America. To next voyage, travel on.